Good evening, Summoners. My name is John, and this is the inaugural episode of a video series that I have decided to call LeagueLearning. I was originally going to call it League of Learning, but that was already taken, so here we are. The first episode is called League Lingo, and in this series I will endeavor to help people who are somewhat new to League of Legends how to be better at the fundamentals of the game and to improve their play overall. Two things I expect you already know how to do if you're watching this series is number one, you know how to move your character around by right-clicking. If you don't know how to move your character around, you probably shouldn't be playing League of Legends until you do. Secondly, I assume that you know how to use your abilities with the keyboard, Q, W, E, and R. And if you don't, go take the wonderful tutorial that the people at Riot have created for you, and take that over and over again until you do know how. But to the people who are new at League, they may have heard unfamiliar terms being thrown around in game chat or in forums if you happen to go and read on forums. And things like AD, AP, carry, tank, caster, bot, backdoor. All of these things are things that are pretty unique to League of Legends as a game. Some things carry over, but that's not really the point. The point is I'm here to help you understand what all these things are. And so we're going to begin with statistics, which are the pieces of information about your champion that dictate how they'll perform in battle. So the first we have to talk about is AA. If someone tells you to AA, they're telling you to auto attack, and that's what happens when your champion right-clicks on a target and does a certain amount of damage. AS, or attack speed, is a statistic that makes your champion auto attack faster and has a direct relation to attacks per second. That is, if you have 1 attack speed, you will be performing 1 attack per second. If you have 2 attack speed, you will be performing 2 attacks per second, and so on. The cap, however, the most auto attacks that you can have per second is 2.5. So don't try to build any higher than that because it won't do you any good at all. Speaking of attacks, we have AD, or attack damage. And that's a statistic that increases the damage of your auto attacks in a 1-to-1 sense, i.e. you add 15 damage and then your next auto attack will do 15 more damage, barring any sort of modifiers. We'll talk about those later. The other thing attack damage will do is it will increase the damage of certain abilities on certain champions. And it's important to note whether your champion will scale on attack damage or on the next statistic that I'm going to talk about, which is ability power. An ability power is a statistic that increases the damage of certain abilities on certain champions. And again, be sure to check before you go into the game whether your champion scales on AD or AP. Speaking of abilities, we have to talk about cooldowns. A cooldown, or a CD, is an amount of time you have to wait between uses of a particular ability. If I cast an ability and it has a 5-second cooldown, I have to wait 5 seconds to cast that ability again. And when an ability, skill, or spell is on cooldown or on CD, it means that you can't use it at that moment. So if someone tells you, why didn't you use your heal, your healing ability, you can say it was on cooldown. Only say that if it was actually on cooldown. Don't make excuses. Speaking of cooldowns, we have to talk about cooldown reduction, which is another statistic that reduces that cooldown, reduces the amount of time you have to wait between casting of abilities. It's important to note that the maximum you can achieve is 40%. If you try to go any higher, it won't do you any good. So again, don't build any higher than 40% cooldown reduction. Next we talk about mana, or mana and health. Health is pretty much every champion will have health, and it's simply how much health you have. It's hard to explain it otherwise. Mana, on the other hand, is a resource from which you're able to cast your spells if you have enough mana. Most champions use mana as their source. There are some manaless champions, and another later episode we may talk about those. But primarily, you have to understand that mana is just a sort of a resource you always have to keep in the back of your mind because it determines whether or not you can use your abilities. Speaking of health and mana, we also have health and mana regeneration. Mana regeneration is abbreviated MP5, which stands for mana per 5. Because the numbers in League of Legends are determined by every 5 seconds. If you have 18 MP5, that means you're regenerating 18 mana every 5 seconds. And the same with health, which is HP5. Now, we've talked about health, which is sort of a defensive thing, and we've got 2 defensive statistics, which are magic resist, and that reduces damage dealt by magic damage. And I'll go into the math of how much magic resist will reduce how much magic damage by how much in a later episode, and I'll talk about how all that works. It's kind of complicated at first, but you can get to understand it. It's really not terribly difficult once you sort of grasp the concept. And the same thing with armor. Armor is the counterpart for physical damage. Now, all auto attacks do physical damage, and a lot of abilities will do magic damage as well, but some will do physical damage. So again, that's something you need to be checking on your champion before you go into the match. Not truly a numerical stat in the traditional sense, but we have to talk about DPS, which is damage per second, and it's sort of just a rough guess or a general idea of how much damage a champion can do, and about how quickly they can do it. For example, a tank may be able to do 100 damage, in 1 second, whereas a carry would be able to do 1,000 damage in a second. And so these are things that say, okay, well, you can look at it and say a carry will do a lot more damage over time than a tank will, and that's generally true. And then the final statistic we want to talk about is movement speed, which is abbreviated MS. And it's simply how quickly your champion moves. The higher your movement speed, the more quickly your champion moves. And there's a cap, a soft cap, that will reduce, you get diminishing returns above a certain point. Again, we'll talk about those in a later episode.